As people are coming in, if folks wouldn't mind sharing in the chat a little bit about who you are, where you're coming from, what you're working on, what are you looking for, just any of those that make sense for you to share with us. We'll be getting started in just a minute or two. So please do a quick introduction in the chat if you'd like. I'm glad to see a lot of people were still able to make it despite the potential mix-up in some of the announcements or emails about the time for today's meeting, webinar. Great, well, we're gonna get started. My name is Matt Feinstein. I am the manager of the CoOp Clinic at the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. And today we'll be doing a webinar about how to start a worker co-op. It's a 90-minute webinar, but there'll be plenty of time at the end for discussion. But as we go, feel free to put your comments or questions in the chat. And for those just arriving, please share a little bit about who you are, where you're coming from, what you're working on, and what you're looking for in the chat if you feel comfortable. We are recording this webinar, but we encourage folks to unmute their camera, especially during discussion or anytime you'd like to come off mute there. And again, chime in on questions, and if they're relevant, to the topic at hand, or especially relevant to multiple people, I'll try to address them as we go through. If not, we'll be having lots of question and answer time at the end. And just a reminder to please keep your audio muted when you're not speaking to avoid background noise. I think we're all probably experts at that by now, but just a reminder. So for those just joining, please share a little bit in the chat of who you are, where you're coming from, what you're looking for, if you'd like. And this will be a 90-minute webinar. We'll be going through lots of material, but feel free to chime in with questions and comments as we go, especially in the chat, and we'll have time at the end for discussion. So let's dive right into it. First, a little bit about a program we run here at the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. The CoOp Clinic has a whole network of peer advisors, people who are from cooperatives, who have done work in cooperatives, who are trained as advisors and are available to support other startups and conversions. And so we're able to offer folks who have attended this training a free 30-minute consultation. You fill out a really quick form at usworker.coop, and you look for the program called CoOp Clinic and it Get Support button. And then it's a really quick form, and then you'll immediately be able to book a calendar event with us and do a consult. And in that, we'll be able to get you resources for your specific situation, and we'll send you a bunch of free resources. So take advantage of that if you're in a place where you're ready to get going and want some specific resources. And if you're looking for technical assistance, then we have lots to offer in that regard. So the CoOp Clinic is the technical assistance program of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. For those just joining us, please share a little bit in the chat of who you are, where you're coming from, what you're looking for, what you're working on. Okay, let's dive into the information part of this. So This is one way of categorizing the different types of cooperatives, right? If you think about consumer cooperatives are the folks who have come together to buy together. You might be familiar with this model with natural food grocery stores, for example, where they're consumer-owned cooperative retail grocers, where they've come together to make sure that there's really good access to healthy foods. And so that is owned and governed by the consumers, folks purchasing from the cooperative. So that's one type of cooperative. Then there are producer cooperatives where folks have come together to improve their selling and marketing. So this is especially common in the agricultural sector. Ocean Spray, cranberry juice, for example, all those cranberry growers came together to process and market and sell their cranberry product together. So the owners of the farm are the producer owners of that cooperative. Not every person picking the cranberries, but the farmers. So those are often owned by businesses. Those cooperatives are, and again, that's in the agricultural sector and other sectors as well for producers. Worker cooperatives are where the people in a workplace are the member owners of the cooperative. That's the focus of this webinar, is on worker cooperatives. We also, will be touching on, and it's a common practice to have multi-stakeholder cooperatives that mix consumer member owners and worker member owners, for example. But again, the focus today is on worker cooperatives. Folks start worker cooperatives for a number of reasons, right? They're looking for good work for themselves and others in their community, fair pay, job security, benefits to the community. And a good co-op has all of these, built in. But, when you get started, one can be a larger focus than another. Some aspects of worker cooperatives is both joint ownership and democratic decision making, right? So the financial benefit and joint ownership is a member owned company, right, where people contribute a member contribution or fee, and then they are entitled for the benefit that arises from that, profit sharing, sustainable jobs, right? And then there's democratic control. Those members make the largest decisions in the cooperative. So for example, they may elect the board of directors, or if they're a collective, they may make a lot of the governance decisions on the day-to-day basis. So that democratic decision making and the financial benefit you find in worker cooperatives. Now, our movement is broader than that, right? We have employee stock ownership plans, right? ESOPs that have the joint ownership component, right? They're employee owned. And if you're an employee at an ESOP, you can buy in and have that financial benefit, but there's not necessarily the democratic decision making, right? They can have a very traditional corporate structure without any democracy to those employees. And that's an ESOP. And then there are also nonprofits and other entities that are democratic and are democratic workplaces. So a staff-directed nonprofit, for example, is a democratic workplace, but it doesn't necessarily have that joint ownership. In a nonprofit, you don't have the profit sharing, you don't have the financial benefit can't be essentially for the staff of that nonprofit, but you can have the democratic workplaces. So we consider, we welcome this whole range of businesses and organizations in our movement, but today we're focusing on worker cooperatives that have both of these elements in them. For more information on staff-directed nonprofits, if you are going to be working in that nonprofit model, then the Sustainable Economies Law Center, theselc.org, has a lot of great resources on those nonprofits. To give you a little sense of the worker co-op movement in the US, there's probably between 700 and 900 worker co-ops by now. It's a little hard to track the number. There's a lot in the startup phase, and we have 465 verified worker cooperatives, and hopefully we'll have more than that soon as we go through the data we just collected in our last co-op census. And we have over 350 members in our federation. So it's not a huge number of cooperatives compared to other sectors like electric cooperatives, for example, or have much larger numbers, but it's a growing movement, and it has deep roots in social movements and democracy. And there is a lot of energy and movement on this. The resource I shared about the Sustainable Economies Law Center, thank you for someone who pasted the link in the chat. Yeah, Sustainable Economies Law Center, and there's a lot of info on those self-directed nonprofits there. Yeah, and I'm seeing some of the, yeah, so housing cooperatives are a good example of a consumer cooperative, right? The folks who are consuming the product of the entity, which is housing, are the folks who are the member owners of that. And yeah, so there's democracy there, right? The members of the housing cooperative can elect their board of directors, for example. So that's a good example of another kind of cooperative. So a little bit more about the worker cooperative movement. We often think about co-ops, and we might think about the 70s food cooperatives, like a hippie, white culture kind of cooperative. And that's not the case for the worker cooperative movement currently, right? We're a majority Black, Indigenous people of color movement with a strong Latinx membership and leadership and protagonism. And you know, those are the fastest growing arenas too in cities, in places that are Latinx and Black owned cooperatives are on the rise as well. So this is the demographic breakdown, just to give you a sense. And just to run through the cooperative principles, these are co-op principles that are kind of accepted throughout the broader cooperative movements, but especially in worker cooperatives, voluntary and open membership means a commitment to anti-oppression. When done well, this is thinking about your membership. It doesn't mean anyone can join your cooperative at any time. It means that you have a democratic process for people who are working in your business to have a route to become member owners, right? And that there's no forced membership. They can leave if they want. So, but again, it's also about, you know, rooting out systems of oppression and exclusion. The second principle around democratic member control, we already talked about that. That, in its basic sense, is voting, you know, for a board or the governing body or leadership. But it can take lots of different formats that we'll be talking about soon. But the essential major decisions in the cooperative are made by the members at the rate of one member, one vote. One person invests more does not mean that they get more votes. The third principle is member economic participation. We also talked about this. There is some sort of participation from each of the members in your cooperative, usually in the form of a fee, as well as their work in the co-op. Autonomy and independence is principle 4, and that means that you're not beholden to a larger, you know, another organization. You're not a dependent organization or subsidiary. You can federate and you can have a franchise. There are very successful co-op franchises. You can have voluntary associations like that, and close connections and shared resources and things like that. But essentially, you do have your independence and autonomy. Principle 5, education, training, and information, is an active component of in cooperatives. It's not just something that comes when you get onboarded and then you never get access to any, additional training or education. It has to be a constant process in cooperatives for them to function in a democratic way. Cooperation amongst cooperatives is principle 6. It's sometimes called P6, shortened to P6, because it's such a key principle amongst cooperatives to share, to connect up in value chains, in supply chains, into supporting each other. When things get rough for one co-op, others are there to support them. And that's important. We're, part of our federation is really about that, right? We contribute, we have a vote in our broader movement and elect the board to our federation. We decide the major policy initiatives, and we try to build all together and cooperate when we can. Concern for community in cooperatives. So this is often the reason people come together. They have a community issue they want to solve, right? Cooperatives exist to meet a need in the community. And this also needs to translate in for a lot of cooperatives in strong environmental practices, climate justice practices, things like that. So these are the 7 international cooperative principles, and co-ops are expected to take these on in their process. They can look differently for different co-ops, but so worker co-ops are really about this shared decision, this democracy situation, the shared wealth. When we're talking about building prosperity, building wealth in our communities, instead of one CEO taking, a lion's share of the wealth from a corporation, we in worker cooperatives are dedicated to joint prosperity and wealth sharing. And again, community, right? A shared vision and culture in the community. And so all 3 of these are stitched into cooperatives. Some might be really strong in one as they get going, and build out the other arenas. But they should have all 3. To give an example, Cerro Cooperative in Boston, to give an example of this, came together because there was some shift happening with all the food scraps in Boston from restaurants and elsewhere, being treated as waste into being treated as a regenerative potential resource, right? And the climate implications of having so much food scraps going into the waste stream. So they came together to form a composting cooperative, purchased a fleet of trucks, and at the same time, there was quite a movement in Boston to build, livable wage jobs with dignity, with brown and black coalitions happening, language justice happening in the workplace. And so they were able to, run a successful business that is paying, good wages, that is organized democratically, and it benefits the community and the climate concerns of the broader community. So, you know, that's one example. There are some great ones all over the country that embody all of these principles. Um, Now, though we're focused on startups in today's webinar, it's important to mention conversions because there's there's a lot of overlap, and a lot of folks interested in cooperatives already have a business going, and they're looking to convert that existing business into a cooperative and to build employee ownership into their business model. And that process is a messy one sometimes, going from that caterpillar to a butterfly. Um, but it can have such a beautiful result, and a lot of things can happen in that transformation, right? In that metamorphosis, we see some major things shifting, not just in terms of ownership and decision making, but also sometimes a real refocusing on racial equity or gender equity or things like that, a real ability to shift some of those equity dynamics as you convert the cooperative, at the same time as preserving a lot of the legacy and the culture that the company does want to maintain, and it preserves the jobs instead of a close down or a sell off of the company. It can really, build on the strengths and preserve a lot of the legacy that a business owner wants to maintain, whether they're looking to stay in the business and grow, but grow it together and share the ownership and the profit sharing and going forward. There is of course compensation in that, and or if a business owner is looking to sell their business to the employees, to the workers. Um, Both of those are conversions or combinations of those. Maybe an owner is looking to pass it on to the workers and community, but over a number of years. All of those are possible, and there's a lot of great examples happening right now with a broad range of support from community organizations and business support organizations. Um, there's a whole national collaborative that we're a part of called the Workers to Owners Collaborative. And there are great stories from that collaborative that have been captured in video and documented. And the data of all that is at becomingemployeeowned.org. Um, so, so today, a lot of what we're talking about is startup focused, but it may be relevant to people interested in conversions as well. So here we're going to go through all the kind of components of startup, or many of the components, and we're going to try to organize it in a way that might be useful for your startup team. And so let's try to think about three areas for this startup. The first one is the co-op capacity development. This is the internal culture and the delegation of work, the frameworks that you're setting up. Then there's the business development, the real entrepreneurship and the legal structures and things like that. Then there's the ecosystem development, building with the community around you, starting to get connections to potential clients and customers. So let's walk through each of these. And as we do, start thinking about your team that you're starting to assemble or you have assembled for your cooperative, and where do you fit? Where do your other team members fit? Where are you lacking and maybe need additional team members? Co-op capacity, this first arena, this person will really have their eyes focused on going from an individual vision into a shared vision, thinking about membership, delegation of work, and accountability. So this shared vision process is a tricky one. Entrepreneurs come with a strong idea and a passion in their work, right? Um, and uh, and often getting from that one lone genius idea into a shared shared vision is a challenging one. But um, but almost always you get a stronger one at the end of it. You incorporate other people's visions, you find weak areas and improve upon them. You're better able to articulate the vision to the community. So you may form a learning group. There are a lot of great book clubs and reading groups uh, that have been the initiators of cooperatives. And you're starting to meet regularly with a really well organized agenda, and you're starting to figure out who's doing what in the cooperative. Sometimes you get outside facilitation to help you build that shared vision, and really focused on what the need is in the community, right? What's the economic or social need that you're trying to address? Let me give an example. um, I used to do a lot of documentary filmmaking work and youth development work, and in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I was doing this work kind of on my own with some, not very high tech equipment. And then I bumped into some other documentary filmmakers. Some had more of the kind of TV, PSA, public service announcement kind of experience, and some had more of the youth development experience. Um, and we came together and said, okay, what can we build together? And we started a worker cooperative called Future Focused Media Cooperative. And instead of us each owning, a mediocre camera, we bought some equipment together that we could use on our major shoots. We um, shared the editing platforms and the knowledge, and did our marketing together. And we each had a slightly different vision as we came in, but we were able to meld them together, and the result was a much stronger one. Let me give another example of this, of a worker co-op farm that I've supported um, in Western Massachusetts, called Riquezas del Campo. And they came together around their common passion for growing vegetables and for workers' rights, right? They came together as they connected through a worker center. And they they linked up, and they said, how can we not just grow together but create some jobs together, make sure we're pushing the needle in the farming industry in our area. And they created this big bold vision for a worker co-op farm, and are growing um, from that work. And it wasn't easy. There's a lot of facilitated discussions about how, not just what our vision is, but how are we going to make this happen. So and then in this first arena, the we're thinking about what it means to be a member. What are the expectations of members? What are the rights and responsibilities of members? What are the contributions? What's the onboarding going to look like? Who's really in as a member, and who's maybe more an advisor capacity? And so they'll be thinking about that. And there are great activities that you can do to really flesh out what are the rights and responsibilities within your cooperative. So if you're thinking about the financial participation, you have a right to patronize, you have a right to work in the co-op, and you have a right to share in the profits from your work. But you also have the responsibility to provide that labor on a regular basis as the co-op needs, to pay a fee to be involved, um, to approve a budget, and to be responsible for losses. So, and if you're thinking in the education arena, right, you have the right to educational opportunities, to improving your educational um, situation, but you also have the responsibility to educate yourself and others. In terms of governance, that's like how decisions are made, um, and who is in responsibility positions of responsibility. You have the right to run for the board, to vote for the board, to be part of the decision making collective. If it's a collective structure, but you also have the responsibility to participate in that, to actually vote, to do what is often called autogestión, or like a self-management, self-organization principle, right? To really do it ourselves, and to show that we can organize ourselves. In terms of information, you have rights to know the bylaws, the policies, the financial information, um, but you have a responsibility to be transparent in that as well. So these are some examples of rights and responsibilities, and each group would want to go into more depth on this. And this first person would usher that process. This this first work area also includes delegating the work, not letting it all fall to one person, finding tasks that are meaningful, and really develop people's ownership and stake in the cooperative. This is not that easy. Not the most familiar thing, to have shared work, to have an active delegation process. Um, but it's a really important one to build your muscle from the very beginning as you do your startup process. And as you do that, accountability will really help. What can that look like? It can be giving really clear tasks, explicit in your meeting notes, for example, or your task lists, checking in on the progress of these tasks. Um, and if someone doesn't do the task, checking in why weren't they able to do the task? Do they need more information? Do they need more support? Do they have too much on their plate right now? And when things are accomplished, celebrating those. So good systems of accountability early on. I cannot stress this enough. That is so key for the co-op um, startup process. Let's give an example of that. Llama Pepper Farm, they're growing some great peppers. They're really excited about their pepper growing and about these kooky llamas that are wandering around all over their farm. They love that aspect of it. Um, but But in terms of their systems, they were like, "Oh, we'll get to that later." They noticed their meetings were all over the place, their tasks were, like, disorganized, some really key things were getting dropped. So they said, "Okay, let's hold up. We'll keep growing our peppers. We won't grow that extra field we were thinking of right now. Well, maybe we'll get to that later in the season, but let's focus um, on our systems. And let's make sure each of us, even though we're in this startup phase, we're still formalizing, our legal entity and stuff, but we're going to make sure we have work plans. We have just job descriptions and work plans, and we have peer evaluations happening, right? We'll be checking in with each other and how can we support you? What's going on? What are your challenges? We'll have good systems for that and regular evaluations. We'll have task lists in our meetings and we'll check in on those. We'll even put in place some grievance procedures so that if there are harms that come up before they come up, we'll have a process to deal with them. And we'll have a process to remove a member if we need to. So they got a lot of those in place. They know how to even suspend one of their worker owners. It's like thinking about that. Your friend and colleague in your workplace, you may have to suspend them if that's what the co-op needs. Well, now you have a system for it. And now they have much more successful meetings, uh, and their llamas are happy and their peppers are growing really strong. So accountability, it's key. So that's the first work area, right? In the internal co-op capacity development. Um, In the second arena, business development, this is, making sure that you're running a business that will continue. This is creating value, making sure you have the right legal form, raising sufficient capital, and having a management structure that works for you. So for folks, especially not coming with a business background, we come into this with our passion and our mission, and we know how to do the work. Um, I loved making documentary films, but I had to learn how to make sure that they could be sold to the educational market and that we could be funded to make our next documentary. Um, and so making sure that we know that we're creating value for our customers, for our clients. Um, this, is a key and obvious principle for any small business startup. Um, but it's really about answering, what is your product or service providing that others are not providing, and what is your niche? What is your unique value that you're adding? Are you more, are you bringing higher quality goods? Are you bringing something to a geography that is not served? Are you bringing something that's more convenient? What's the problem that the clients, you have to take this client perspective, right? And see what are they seeing? What are the obstacles that they're seeing in your arena? And how, is your co-op going to solve that problem for them? You can come at it from, I love to create these widgets and I'm just going to create these widgets. But if you don't really have the perspective of the client in mind, it won't be a sustainable business. And we want to see these last. So remember to have someone on your team who can really look at uh, that revenue stream issue, the value proposition. Uh, And one great tool for that is the business model canvas. It helps you make kind of a lean business model or lean business plan. Uh, that is a tool where you can see your key aspects of your business in one visual. So you see your customers, you see how your product connects with that. You see your unique value proposition, things like that. So that is one free tool that's all over the place, and we have some co-op improvements of that tool too, if you're interested. Um, uh, and then the second work area will also be looking at the legal entity. Um, so we really suggest that you answer some basic questions, such as who do we want to be members and how will people become members? How are we going to make decisions? Are we going to do consensus decision making? Are we going to be striving for consensus with a fallback um, majority vote? Are there certain decisions that we want to be higher bars and be a super majority, like a 2/3 or a 3/4 majority vote? Uh, we often suggest to have a pretty high bar to bring in new members, to make major shifts like changing your bylaws or operating agreements, um, to close down the cooperative. Have pretty high bars for those, but have lower bars for you know, regular approvals that you'll need, or removal of members, so you don't get stuck in a place where there's one person with a few key allies that's able to create a lot of harm and disruption in your cooperative. So you want to think about some of those things, and about the fees or costs to join your cooperative. You want to think about where you'll be doing your operations. Are you in multiple states? Um, you need to think about uh, if and when there's profits generated by your cooperative, how will those be distributed? The most common way to do that is in a worker cooperative is based on the number of hours worked in a year, and you tally it up in the year and divide it up based on that those hours, which are called patronage in a worker cooperative. But there are other ways to do it too. So think about how that will happen, um, and then think about where your funding is going to come from. Will you have sufficient capital from your members in their fees and additional capital contributions that they bring in, or are you going to need outside investors of different ways? And we can talk about um, that investment a little bit more. But if you answer some of those questions, then when you sit down with a lawyer, you can have a much more productive conversation, and they can help you guide you to the right kind of legal entity that will work for you. Many states in the US have cooperative corporations. Several states have worker cooperative corporations or employee cooperative corporations. Um, and those might be best if you're raising a lot of outside capital, for example, or you want an investor class. Well, some states allow that, many do not in cooperatives. Um, but many times an LLC is what's right for your cooperative. A limited liability company is a quite flexible business entity model, and it provides very similar liability protections from a corporation, but there are options in there um, to be treated, you know, to treat the owners differently and not as strict employees as you might be in a corporation. So you want to figure out a lot of those, you know, how are people going to be employed? Are they all going to be regular W-2 employees, or are you going to have some people that would be better remunerated as owners and take ownership draws? And so if you answer some of those questions, um, yeah, so if you have many new members and you're adding new folks, then LSCs might be a trickier model. So answer some of those questions. Sit down with a lawyer that knows co-ops, and we can help refer you to lawyers that are familiar with the cooperative models, worker cooperative specifically. There's a great community of them around, and if there's not one in your state, we can hopefully connect you to one that doesn't mind having, you know, supporting from afar in at least some of the work. Um, so and to just give a general overview, not to get too overwhelmed about this, but just to know that there is a mechanism in cooperatives that meet the subchapter T that the IRS deems cooperatives. If you function as a cooperative and you can prove it in your documents and your taxation, then you can get under this subchapter T, which allows for this mechanism for you to reinvest some of your profits into the cooperative, but allocate it to individuals. So what happens? You have surplus that's generated by the members. If you have stuff that's generated by non-members, like people who are not yet members or employees who are not members, then that goes into the collective account and is taxed at the corporate level. But now, let's say you're looking at all that surplus that comes from members. You have a choice point, usually annually. Some will go into the collective account, and some you can allocate as member patronage, right? And you'll have a second choice point. How much will go out as cash? And it has to be at least 20% usually to cover the taxes, because people are paying individual tax on this component of it. But then another, maybe 50%, maybe 80% is being reinvested in the co-op. It looks great on your balance sheet, meaning your financials. If you're going for a loan or something, it can really help you look good. And be in a more stable financial situation and be able to reinvest, especially in early years of profit. This is useful, but it's allocated to those individuals so that when they leave or when your co-ops decides to pay that out, they get those patronage dividends, and the tax is already paid, and they get to take those take that out of the co-op. Now, you can say that it'll be over a certain number of years, so if a bunch of people leave at the same time, it won't bankrupt your co-op. But just know that this mechanism exists. You don't need to know all the details of setting it up, or get overwhelmed by this. You can talk to a lawyer and a CPA, an accountant that can help you set up these systems. But just know that this is a benefit. You can have all this, individual allocation without being taxed twice. If you're not a co-op, you may have to pay tax twice on some of that profit. So this person will be thinking about those mechanisms, this person or group or team that will be working in the second work area. They're also thinking about raising startup capital. There are some great lenders that exist specifically to lend to the co-op movement. And when you borrow from them and pay some interest, then it's going back into the co-op movement. It's supporting ongoing loans to co-ops in the future. So if you're needing a loan, look for one of those co-op lenders first. And these co-op lenders will often not need you to get your individual credit scores or put up individual equity. Like, you don't have to put your home on the line for starting this business. If you have a strong collective business plan, they may ask for collateral, things that you would put on the line in case the loan goes sour. But often, it's collective collateral. It's the equipment that you want to purchase with this loan might serve as a lot of the collateral for the loan, for example. And some lenders don't even require that collateral. So look for sharedcapital.coop, which functions nationally. The Cooperative Fund of New England, which lends to New England and New York. The Working World and the Seed Commons Cooperative, seedcommons.coop. Those are all entities that lend specifically to co-ops and really get worker co-ops, and will be a much more pleasant experience working with them than a traditional bank or an investor that's looking to really have a lot of say. There are some of those offer, and other places offer some sort of equity investment instead of like a loan, which is a note that you have to pay over a certain number of time. An equity investment you pay back when your co-op is doing well. Thank you for the correction, seedcommons.org. So they can often provide equity investment. This means it's not a loan with a term. It's a payback when your co-op is able to pay that back. and they may be more involved in making sure that you're doing healthy work, but investors in cooperatives should not be expecting a seat on the board or a veto or a vote. Um, this has to be explained to investors early on. They could have an investor class, they could be some sort of member in your cooperative if you want, but just because they're investing more doesn't mean they have more of a say. And that is different than other kinds of angel investing, or broader small business investing work. So it's important to distinguish that. Um, but as much as you can collectivize the risk, not letting one member put it on their credit card, um, and you know the other thing is, if you're dealing with investors and you're dealing with a return on investment, even from your members, you have to be very careful of securities laws. The, it's an important thing to talk to a lawyer about if you're considering investors that will get a return. And each state is different on securities laws, so find someone who can help you. This second bucket will also be thinking about the governance and management structures. One common structure is for the worker owners to elect a board, and the board then hires a manager or a management team, and that board, sets the vision and does the governance, and then oversees that leadership team, the management. And the management can hire, be involved in hiring, and is involved in making sure that the workers are doing productive work in the operations of the work. And there's a cyclical system of accountability. That's one system, but you can get creative in your management structure. You can have a committee-based system. You can employ sociocracy or holocracy, which are circle-based governance structures where you have very empowered circles that are very clear on their work areas and are empowered to make a lot of decisions, and have like a spokes model where they have representatives up and down from other conjoining circles that can function like a board. Um, so you can get creative. You can have a very horizontal structure with committees and a collective. Um, you can have all your members be board members and have a collective board. Um, it's really what you want to make of your governance, but what's important is to be really clear about that, and to be clear to people coming into your cooperative what their expectations are. Are they going to be voting for a board, or are they going to be on the board? So thinking about structure is part of that second arena. And then the third arena is about building this ecosystem, thinking about folks around you. How do you get the assistance you need? How do you connect to movements? How do you get customer feedback and involvement? And how might you connect with local government? Um, Technical assistance, that just means support for your startup process. Um, it there are technical assistance providers in most states in the US, and on our website there's a service provider directory, and you can search by state for those co-op developers, and they're especially good on the democratic processes. How do you set up your governance? How do you make sure that people know what your decision making structure is in the meeting? Things like that. uh, Structure questions. Co-op developers are great for that. But there's a lot of resources out there for general small businesses. The small business development centers, universities have resources for small businesses. Um, so look for those too. You can often find really inexpensive or free services for small businesses. And a lot of the marketing work, the financial projections, the many aspects of your business plan will be similar to other small businesses, and they can and those folks can support you. So find the right mix of assistance in your work. Um, And the Co-op Clinic, again, at the Federation, our program can connect you to advisors and technical assistance professionals in the arenas that you're needing for your co-op. If you're in a rural area, we have funding that can support paying those advisors. If you're in certain other areas, we can help look for subsidizing some of the cost of that assistance. So I encourage you again to, to do that free 30-minute intake, and we can find something specific for your needs. Um, this this third bucket also is connecting to social movements. Your co-op may have its specific mission, but it also can be looking of ways for ways of having a larger impact. And if you, it's important as you're hiring, as you're bringing on people into your team, and as you're hiring new folks into your co-op once you're going, that you take this into account, that you're not just for your specific, operations needs, but someone that can share the vision and perpetuate this connection and vision for broader social change, right? It sometimes can be forgotten and lost and diluted into co-ops as they grow. So think about that. And if you say you're going to be contributing to the movement in a certain way, it's important to live up to that and to walk the walk and to really be accountable to that broader movement. And there's some great examples of co-ops who are doing this and working on doing this better. Cooperation Jackson, for example, in Jackson, Mississippi, comes from a long uh, movement of Black liberation and Black organizing in the South. And they have a cyclical co-op, with a farm and then compost and then, or farm to cafe to compost to farm, and other co-ops that they're working on, with Black leadership there, and are very involved in broader social justice organizing. New Era Windows Cooperative came in as their involvement through the union, and in worker justice struggles, and was able to save a plant that was going to close down in Chicago, and continues strong as a worker cooperative. Design Action Collective does a lot of the artwork for movements, for Black Lives Matter, for um, indigenous struggles, and offer sliding scale fees and connect and support in lots of different ways. So those are just three examples. There are so many in the worker co-op movement. I'm sure your business idea has some way to connect to broader movements. And, you know, for the primary purpose of having that effect in social change, but also having a broader network of support and customer base and things. And, so thinking about that, yeah, someone I think said the enlightened hippie movements. Well, actually, the history of worker cooperatives in the U.S. Has deep roots in Black liberation and Black organizing. Collective Courage is a book that documents this. The Latinx and immigrant struggles are very much intertwined. So think about those connections. Do your homework and know the history. Um, the Federation also, our Federation, Worker Cooperatives, offers member councils and ways to plug in to this. So there's a council on racial and economic justice that meets regularly. There's a policy and advocacy council that can support you in local legislation, or you can get involved in national legislative efforts and policy and advocacy work. There's a Movimiento de Inmigrantes en Cooperativas for migrant justice groups, immigrant worker centers, and others that are involved in the cooperative movement, to name a few councils. Then we have the Union Co-ops Council. So why would you want a union if you're already worker owned? Why would you also want to be unionized? Well, first of all, as a co-op, unions can be helpful, right? They have resources. They've been known to invest heavily financially and staff-wise into forming worker cooperatives. They have experience in grievance processes, access to discounted health rates, with the broader, strength in numbers kind of thing, pension funds, retirement funds. And, so you can have this labor agreement, um, and you can have a union contract, and you can have worker ownership. There's another layer of protection too for workers, especially if you grow larger as a worker cooperative. There can be stratification in your co-op, and some collective bargaining, um, for those who have less power in your co-op. It's another layer for them to stay organized. Um, and then once you're organized, you can have a broader industry impact. For example, Cooperative Home Care Associates is the largest co-op in the US, but it's still small compared to the broader home care industry, right? With a couple thousand members. Um, Through their union, their work with SEIU, they're able to have an impact on the home care industry throughout New York City where they're located, and nationally. So so that, and it's not as an adversarial relationship as some other employment situations where the union is is constantly in conflict. In a co-op, it's a much more collaborative process, but they are looking out for the workers when it comes down to it. So consider union co-ops. There's our council has a whole site, unioncoops.org, with examples and resources for that. And then a lot of it is inspired by the work of Mondragon in the Basque area, Spain, which is the largest worker co-op in the world. They're an industrial goods worker co-op network of hundreds of thousands of workers, and they have created a whole ecosystem, and part of it was these worker councils that were very specifically like a union council. Or in the US, there are some initiatives moving this forward. oneworker1vote.org is one, for example. And there are specific areas like Co-op Cincy and the LA Co-op Initiative and things like that that are specifically union cooperative initiatives. So this third work area is also getting the commitment from the customers, right? They might be doing some pre-sales, polls, community events, maybe in person. Now we can do some things in person again, but connecting with the broader community. One strategy that some co-ops have found successful is getting larger contracts from what are called anchor institutions, the eds, the meds, the hospitals, the universities, the other nonprofit interfaith networks that are not going to pick up and leave from your area, and may have the social mission to really support the community. One way they can do that is to have purchasing agreements from your social enterprise, your co-op. So you can win those contracts. You can do polls and forums and things like that. So this person will really be kind of an outward connecting person or team on your startup. And then be thinking about government goals, right? Are there preferred vendors? Can you register as a women-owned business, for example, and get preferred contracts from your municipality or state? Are there workforce development initiatives? There may be workforce development funds that you can team up with a co-op developer in your area and do a whole bunch of your trainings, get those funded. And maybe there's incentives for your geography. Maybe there are grants for your section of the city to redo the signage in your area or something like that. So look, connect and see if there's government resources to support you as well. So again, there are these three kind of bucket areas that might be useful as you're building your team, and be really intentional about building your team. First of all, remember equity, remember inclusion practices. If you're in a majority Black, Indigenous, people of color community, and your co-op doesn't reflect that, and you're hiring your first 2, 3, 4 people and they're all white, it's going to be much harder to have real community accountability, and to diversify without doing it in a very tokenistic way in the future. So from the very early stages, remember to build in those equity practices, to get training on equity and inclusion practices, to do the anti-oppression work so that your team has a commitment to that from the very beginning. But be thinking about these skill areas too. Maybe the person that is going to be focusing on business development is really good at spreadsheets, right? And the person or people that are focusing on the cooperative capacity, that internal thing, is really good at the group dynamics and training others to facilitate meetings and things like that. And then the ecosystem, right? The networker, the mobilizer. So think about where you might fit, and then you can actually do like a hiring process, even though you don't have a business going yet. Say you could do a hiring process to build up your team. You could do a skills assessment survey of the people you're thinking of bringing onto your team. And I'd love to hear in the discussion that we're coming up on soon what other people are thinking about for their team building, or how they've done that already, or where they've gone to connect with folks. Have you used Facebook groups? Have you gone to other co-op events to find like-minded folks that want to start the initiative with you? So think about your strengths and finding support for the areas of weakness. And if you have a good, strong team, but they need, training in certain areas, definitely reach out for that. Again, this first arena might be really good at that vision and internal work. The business person is really thinking about the product and finance and management. And then the third arena is really thinking about the external connecting, the marketing, the customer service. Where are you going to get your suppliers, your strategic alliances, things like that. So, where do you start? There are also, maps of cooperatives on our website, usworker.coop, to get the other co-ops and to find other co-ops that can support you. There's a lot of co-ops that, or similar industries that are in a different city, that wouldn't mind sharing a lot of their industry secrets because of the commitment to cooperatives. They might share a lot of that information with you, and so you can find a lot of them through our website and the directories we provide at usworker.coop. And we appreciate the people who have contributed for this webinar, and we encourage others to think about joining the federation or supporting. Some of the benefits of becoming a member of the co-op of the federation is getting some free technical assistance from our CoOp Clinic. There are health related benefits. You can get good deals on vision and dental insurance, for example. You can have a connection to these peer networks and member councils. There are strong tech worker co-op peer networks. There's a worker co-op farm peer network. There are design and build and construction peer networks and others, and you can start one. There's probably enough people working in the cannabis industries and hemp to get one of those going, and at least be connected, to them. Some of them are quite active with regular listservs and meetings, and so and then we do a lot of events, and you can get event discounts for the paid events. And we have specific training resources that we'll share with you too as members, and kind of ongoing support. When you hit an issue, it's not just in this initial phase as a startup, but ongoing, we can support. And then you can be involved in, like I mentioned, in the policy and advocacy work, or you can get support if you don't have much support in your region. Then our advocacy council can hopefully lend a hand. There are movement partners and co-op developers around the US. So look yours up at this service provider directory that I mentioned. And then I just want to mention before we move into discussion, yeah, startup membership is $250 for a year. And same with conversion. If you're converting to a cooperative, it's $250 per year. Once you're an established worker cooperative, it's based on your revenue and a few other factors. And if that's absolutely, prohibitive for your co-op, there are ways to do work trades as well. This recording will be available. We will send out links to the slides, and a lot of these resources that we will mention, we'll send those direct links, including one to set up a meeting with us to get some additional specific resources for yourself and kind of assess what kind of technical assistance might be useful for you. So Sustainable Economies Law Center, we've mentioned them. Their other website is co-op-law.org. Democracy at Work Institute is our sister organization that puts out a lot of great resources, and does a lot of support of the conversion work and a lot of other good things. So institute.coop is definitely a place to check out. And then we have a good list of resources at usworker.coop/resources too. And one specific resource that just came out that it's free, it's a free guide about democratic management. There's some great activities and tools and assessments and explanations in this well-indexed but pretty thorough guide on democratic management. So check that out at institute.coop/publications too. So yeah, there are ways of supporting becoming a monthly sustainer of the Federation. And then plug in during our events this fall. We have a worker co-op week. We're still not doing conferences in person, but we have some great stuff in store for the Eastern Conference for Workplace Democracy, or the Western Worker Co-op Conference Convergence. So so those will be November 3rd through 5th, and you can get more info at for those at conference.coop. And sessions are open right now. If you want to propose a session, you can do that there. So that is all I have for information that I wanted to share in this direction. But I'd love to hear again what you're thinking about for your team building, what questions you have, where, any other suggestions you have for other folks that might be getting going. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, put it in the chat, whatever is useful. And we have another 20 minutes if we need it for this conversation. Is anyone in that process of building their team and have any insights for other folks about how they've gone about connecting with other people and thinking about their team building process? One question I get often is, how many people do you want in your core team? When you're getting started, best practice says somewhere between 3 and 15. Usually in the arena of 5 to 7 is kind of ideal if you can build a team of around that size. And then often that team of 7 can become like the founding board. They can be called the steering committee or your core group as you get started, and they often become the founding board of your cooperative until your co-op is ready to do an election, and then the members, all the members at that point, would elect the new board. How soon do you recommend creating a legal entity? Yeah, so it's less about the threshold of number of members, though it is best practice to have at least 3 members when you form your entity, if possible. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it is a best practice. Yeah, it is a good idea before you purchase a bunch of assets so that they can be purchased collectively. That's a consideration you want before deciding when to do your legal entity. You want to make sure you have the capacity to follow through on the governance you set forth for your entity. If you're a cooperative corporation, for example, you need to be able to do your annual meeting, get a quorum. That means the minimum number of people at the meeting to show up and to vote. You want to have some of those processes involved before you set up your legal entity. You want to make sure that it makes sense in terms of the basic fees and taxes, that you're generating enough revenue or expect to generate enough revenue in your first year to be able to cover some of those, that that you'll be able to pay at least minimum wage if people are treated as employees, those kind of things. Those are some of the considerations. But if you're ready to start operations and you know where your first source of revenue will be, and you feel you have a strong enough team to carry out your governance, it is best practice to incorporate, then get capitalized and grow. So yeah, another thing is to be able to answer a bunch of those questions that I laid out earlier before you talk to a lawyer. And so if you have a pretty clear idea who your members are they all going to be workers, or do you want to have um, some consumer members or other classes of membership? You want to sort out a lot of that before you dive in and create your entity. Um, guidelines on which questions should be voted on, consensus, top down. So yeah, in your bylaws, you'll be outlining what kinds of decisions need a higher threshold. Usually the things like I mentioned, closing down the co-op, merging, changing your bylaws or articles of incorporation or organization. Those will require a higher threshold. You might want to require consensus if you're going to be a small co-op going forward, or you might want to require a 3/4 majority vote, for example. So those are some of the arenas you want a higher, threshold. You can, and then it won't be in your governance documents, but you want in your policies and procedures to set up the right decision making for your operations. And it's really important to separate that, right? Governance is like, how do you make decisions on your long-term policies, your bylaws, your board, your officers, the hiring, firing of your manager or CEO, or if you have that structure. But then when you're talking about the operations, the day-to-day, the marketing, the the sales work, the evaluations within your operations work. So all of that you can have a top-down decision-making process for that. You can have a collective decision-making process for that. And it could look very different than your governance decision-making. And those meetings should be separated whenever possible. It's very tempting in early stages to have just one staff meeting or one co-op meeting and have everyone there and making decisions on your mission and bylaws right next to a decision on where you're what kind of marketing you're going to be doing. And if those get mixed up, agendas might be too mixed, and people might not know that a major long lasting decision is being made. It's not clear what the role will be of the board going forward. So as much as you can dissect those early on, and have clear agendas that delineate which are long-term policy governance type decisions, and which do require that higher threshold. Make sure you outline that in your operating agreement or bylaws and follow it. There are some great examples of operating agreements and bylaws. You won't have to build them from scratch. You can work with a co-op developer and lawyer to make some that really work for you. Yes, there's a bylaws committee. There's some bylaws committee folks. So you're talking our language here when you're talking about, right, what kinds of decisions, which meetings require what kind of advance notice. In most corporation statutes have some requirements about annual meetings, for example, that you need to give notice to all the members within a certain amount of time, and you delineate how you do that. Or special meetings, right? To fill a vacant seat on your board, for example, you may need to call a special meeting so that things can't be moved around or switched or taken over by a board really quickly without the broader consent of the broader membership. Yeah, day-to-day tasks. Yeah, sociocracy is a good tool that you can empower committees to take on those daily tasks, right? Yeah, example bylaws for worker co-ops. We can definitely provide you those. If we have a long, that conversation, do an intake and discuss what type of co-op you're looking to be, what state you're working in. We don't really suggest that you just take templates and change it yourself. That you work with a co-op developer, you work with a lawyer to make sure it really fits you, because those are long-term documents. And if you get into a conflict situation, we talked about preventing conflict, with having good systems of accountability, but conflict will happen in business in general and in cooperatives especially. Um, so setting up good systems to work through those issues, to being crystal clear, if one person is causing harm in the co-op, how are they removed, or how do they have a chance to explain what they did and possibly restore that trust, or how are they removed? Having those key documents in place is important. Any other questions or comments or suggestions? Feel free to unmute yourself and share anything. And if I miss something in the chat, feel free to bring it up here or restate it.
So when you were speaking, hi, Martin from Massachusetts, on the part A, the cooperative capacity development, that sort of core competency, you're speaking of lone genius idea and coming to, and all these developments seems to happen a little concurrently, but that specifically is where we are as sort of in our group anyhow right now in a lot of ways. Implementing this agile concept that a member has used in her work, and to try to keep us accountable, and we've just started doing that. So I guess this thoughts you might have on taking it, because we've done a lot of the set of mission work and vision and things like this, but yeah, just any thoughts you might have on that.
So maybe that individual has a lot of the knowledge and vision for the business operations, but other folks can bring in connections, other connections that will shape the vision, right? Strategic partnerships that are not necessarily just in that, one, founder's line of sight, that can diversify who you're connected to, who you're working with, and who your business is serving, right? So that's one area. If you can show that the other team members are bringing things to the table in that regard, then that that founder who has a vision may be more open to creating a more of a shared vision, right? Or if you can be really clear on those on the tasks of and really value kind of some of that internal dynamic work. Sometimes I know how this business operates. I'm bringing all these clients to the table. I have the expertise in our business operations. That can be super valued in your co-op, and the person who's really good at the internal processes may be just as important for the success of the co-op, but not valued. So being intentional about valuing what people do bring to the table might be a good practice, and naming it and listing it, and making it visible in task lists for your and running agendas and task list documents for your meetings. let's see if anyone else has suggestions around this too, because this is kind of common to building an organization in lots of arenas, not just worker co-ops, right? Is that going from people's individuals visions to a shared vision. Getting strong outside facilitation, doing kind of retreat style work with a facilitator that can bring you through participatory activities is often a good way to do that. I'm part of a farm retreat center here in Massachusetts that is offering that to some co-ops as an intensive, right? You can build relationships, you can build that shared vision, you can build out your business plan and get a lot done. That's one program. And there are co-op academies around the country too. You might want to participate in those co-op academies, learn together about the different aspects. I've touched on so many different aspects, but if you learn together in those arenas, you could take an online co-op academy, like the LA Co-op Lab offers an online one. You could take that together, and then you're like building, certain aspects that might not be fleshed out in your co-op together instead of just depending on that one person's experience. These are some thoughts. If you are just one person and you want to make it into a co-op, that is a tricky place to be. And I've known lots of people who have gotten stuck in that place, right? I really want to make this a co-op. I want to find people. And then it's hard to really include folks or to find the right people. Yeah, finding co-op members, I've talked a little bit about that today, and we will be sharing a resource on that soon. We'll be rolling it out for our fall member meeting for the Federation. And it really is about like having an intentional process, thinking about the equity issues, really getting a sense of what people have to bring to the table. Do they have core competencies like good communication practices, and then can they learn the other aspects like understanding co-ops, because that can be taught. Um, Doing pre-phone interviews or actual interviews with potential new co-op members. And in that process, you have to say, I'm not just hiring you for an eventual job. You're coming on as an entrepreneur in this effort too, right? You're going to be an owner. There's going to be shared risk and shared reward. So being really upfront about that is key. And being open to sharing your vision and letting it evolve. Yeah, there's a co-op academy in Buffalo. That's great. Getting funding while you're still working on your articles of incorporation. Yeah, it's hard to get a loan while you're, still setting up your structures and you're not incorporated yet. But you can get some pre pre-operation capital. Several co-ops have done successful crowdfunding campaigns. You can do pre-sales that way. You often may need to find a fiscal sponsor, find a nonprofit organization or another co-op that can sponsor your operations in the meantime. There are grants available. They're pretty limited, but there are grants available for startup co-ops, especially if you have strong mission and educational, components of your work, which I know you all do in the Buffalo area. And I think, that relationship with a nonprofit is a tricky one. There are a lot of great potentials with it, right? You can access tax deductible donations and grant funding, foundations that require 501c3 nonprofits. You can team up with a fiscal sponsor organization to provide that, especially for the educational work you're doing, the training, the job creation work you're doing. You can have that relationship, and you can have those benefits while still being accountable to your members and not to the general public like a nonprofit is, or accountable to those foundations like a nonprofit is. So, but in that fiscal sponsorship relationship, you want to make sure that it's really clear. You want to have a memorandum between you two to say, this is the role of the nonprofit and this is the co-op, and we are autonomous. And be careful of too much co-branding. Be careful of the nonprofit wanting to have a constant stream of your members becoming their members. Just be really clear about those things as you get started and get going with those relationships. But they often can be really beneficial, and you can be providing a lot to that nonprofit, in terms of really organizing workforces. We do have public speakers available. We have a speakers bureau that is almost ready to launch. Again, that's something we're doing in our September member meeting. But right now too, we can hook you up with speakers. We have a lot of great board members and leaders from our co-op movement that are available to do speaking engagements. So yes, definitely get in touch if you want us to connect you with a speaker. Are there any other thoughts or questions or things people want to share? Yes, stock classes is a big question to ask right at the end of this webinar, and something you'll want to talk to a legal or tax professional about. But co-ops, some cooperative corporations do allow for multiple classes of stock, right? Usually, you have the member stock that is a voting class of stock in a corporation, member shares, right? But in some states you can have an investor class. They're almost always non-voting investors, but they have a member class in your corporation, and they will have certain rights for return on their investments. There are some co-ops that set it up with an investment class for an incubator, like if a nonprofit is putting in a lot of time and effort for them to have a membership class. It's tricky business. I really favor really trusting the members to be the ultimate decision makers, even though, yes, future members could shut down the cooperative even after a lot of community and nonprofit investment. But you kind of have to trust that process and really believe in the autonomy of the members um, is my kind of approach to that. I know other folks may have different approaches to that. But yes, there are some really creative lawyers that can help you think about different classes of stock or you know relationships of LLCs with other LLCs and lots of different creative ways. But don't go too early to a lawyer and say what's available to us, because then they'll do what they know. They will, speak very authoritatively about what is best for you. And it may not be what's in line with your vision. It's much better practice to say, this is how we want it to function. Help us find a legal pathway to get as close as we can to this model we're laying out. This is how we want members to be involved. This is how we want investors to be involved in our co-op. And make sure you're not, violating laws and things with getting the lawyers involved, but make sure it's really directed by your desires and specific outcomes. So again, we have these startup webinars. If there's others in your team that want to take them to participate in this, we do it monthly. The one in October is in Spanish. If you have any members that are Spanish speaking that would like to participate in one of these webinars. And we're also launching a series of webinars that go more in depth on certain areas. The next two we'll be doing is on onboarding and hiring. So I know a lot of folks are in that process right now. So we'll be doing one of those most likely September 1st at 4 p.m. Eastern. And then we will be doing one on conflict. So navigating through conflict and having good systems of accountability. And that will be mid-September, likely Monday, September 13th at 4 p.m. So mark your calendars, but we'll get those out to you in an email as well. And look out for others this fall. and we have lots recorded on our website and things like that. So thank you everyone for participating. We will send out all this info in an email likely Monday. And again, encourage you to follow up if you feel ready to get some technical assistance and more specific resources. Go ahead and sign up for that free half hour. So have a good rest of your day and good luck with your projects.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.